Hello and welcome to our podcast. Today we have a special guest with us who is an experienced English teacher. So let's get started. Luis Eduardo, how are you today, man? What's up? What's the
Ednan,
crack, like we said
how
here,
you
like
doing?
we say here in Ireland? What's the crack, man?
Everything is good. Thank you so much for having me on. It's a pleasure. And I am doing better than you because it looks like you're freezing over there.
Oh yes, 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 yes. We just have a cold wave here. It's unbelievable. It's like the end of March already, in the middle of spring. Summer is coming, and then we have a cold wave. Snow is coming next week, and yeah, it's
Oh,
just the
wow.
usual. Just the usual. All right, but let's get this started. What inspired you to become an English teacher, Lucho?
Well, I think very few teachers that are now teachers, and I think of many subjects. Very few of those teachers, when they were children, said, "I want to be a teacher." It happens kind of by chance, and it's like a random thing. And maybe when you're much older, you're an adult or nearing the adult stage in your life, you say, "Okay, maybe this is something for me." It happened to me. It was something by chance. I came to Colombia and uh, I ran out of money. I ran out of money, and I saw a friend here who I knew from the time that I lived in the United States, and he said, you could be an English teacher. You manage the language well, and I think you can do it. And I said, me, an English teacher, and so I started teaching, but it was really a random thing. And I'm talking about the year 2005. So, I mean, being that I'm in Latin America, things have changed and things keep changing almost exponentially. But back in the day, back in 2005, in the city of Pereira, which is where I reside now, basically, if you had good pronunciation, you could be an English teacher with no qualification, which was in that particular part of my life, that was my case. I had never taught a class, and they heard me speak, and they said, "Hey, you can teach." And I started working in an English academy where the focus was more of a communicative approach, and they really didn't teach grammar and stuff, which is something that I had no idea of how to do. And I started, and I just learned along the way, and
So wait
that's
a minute. So you spoke English at the time, but
Mhm.
you had no idea about grammar,
No idea,
and you
no
became a
idea,
teacher.
and I became a teacher.
That sounds like a puzzle.
It does. It does, and it's kind of I was reading a book last night, and it's kind of the way everything goes. I think as human beings, back when we were cavemen, when we were kind of animals, we had no way of. First, we acted, and then we had a name for the action, and that's kind of how it went with me. I started teaching, and then as I was teaching, I was learning. I kind of was learning the grammar with the students because I had to study in order to be able to teach the grammar. And but I think grammar it's important, but it shouldn't be the focus of the language. And I mean, that's not the way native speakers learn anyway. If in fact, if you talk to a native speaker and you say, what's the third person, they'll say, no, I'm by myself. They have no idea what the third person is. you know uh, they have very little grasp of that knowledge, and that happens for almost all native speakers. They have no idea how the grammar works in their language.
That's true, but all right. At the end, that's good to hear. And when did you become an online teacher? Is it like the same to be a face-to-face teacher, a classroom teacher, and then all of a sudden, out of the blue, you just became an online teacher? How was the process?
Well, I was a school teacher for many years. I worked in English academies, and then I actually also started working for some universities down here as an English teacher. And then I became a school teacher. I was a school teacher for 12 years. And I think the first time I gave an online class, I think this was back in maybe 2018, maybe 2019. But the reason I gave that class was because I had a couple of students uh, that I was their teacher back when they were in high school. They had graduated and they were in another city and they wanted English class. And so, I gave the class online. And as we all know, then the COVID came around, and I think many teachers were forced to become online teachers. It wasn't something that um, and then and now I've been teaching online for years now.
And as an online teacher, Luis, what do you think are the most effective tools for teaching English?
Uh, I think it depends on the aim, because as there's students that say, I only want to focus on pronunciation. Some other students say, I want to focus on listening. So I think the aim is first and foremost. I think also the level of the student is important. Um, but I think more than one effective tool, I think you need an effective process. And I think the effective process is to get immersed as much as you can with the language. Um, I have students, and this is way before I was an online teacher. Just to take you a little bit back, when I started teaching, I started learning this grammar. I was very grammar based, and I think it happens very much to English teachers who are not teaching in native speaking countries. So, if I'm teaching English to kids from Latin America, I started teaching grammar was kind of the focus. And then I noticed that, it wasn't really going anywhere because it's very hard for people to memorize grammar rules. And I started focusing on the students that were doing well. And I would say, why are they doing well versus the other ones that are not doing that well? And I noticed that the students that were doing very well, they were good at grammar, but not because they studied the rules. It's because they did a lot of listening and they did a lot of reading. So then I kind of shifted my focus, and I shifted it to a class where it was more focused on reading and listening, because we learn language with our receptive skills, which is listening and seeing. And the only way we can see a language is via reading. So we need to get enough information in order to produce, which is, spoken language and written language. But we don't learn anything by speaking and writing. And I know that sounds crazy, but think about it. If you lock yourself in a room and just write for 2 hours, you're not going to learn anything because there's no feedback. And the same thing happens when you speak. You can speak to a wall for 2 hours, but you're not going to improve your English because you need feedback. So I think
100%. Yeah.
so I think what you really need is to get as much information as you can in order to be able to produce. So I would say, what I always tell students is, if you want to study without studying, um, pick a series and listen to it in English and read the closed captions or subtitles in English. And that way you're listening, you're reading what they're saying. So you're working on listening, you're working on reading, and you're working pure receptive skills without really studying. And I think it's really an effective tool. Um, but like I said, I mean, it's more than one tool. It's more of a process. I would say do a lot of listening, do a lot of reading. Nowadays, there's just so much technology out there, and it continues to change now with this chat GPT that
Oh,
everybody's talking about.
I'll leave that for the end. We're going to dive into it.
Sure, sure. But yeah,
that's
I
that's
think
very
the
interesting. The
I
chat GPT. We're going to dive into this AI and all this new world. It's just unbelievable.
it's
Thanks,
crazy.
guys. Thanks for tuning in. All of you that are joining us on Spotify, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok. Welcome to this new episode, Hernan's English Classroom. Today we are with teacher Luis Campuzano. Online resources to teach English as a second language. Everything is so interesting, Luis, but there is a question that rises, and it's how do you adapt your teaching style to meet the needs of students from different cultural backgrounds and
That
obviously from different levels, like because I know, for example, you work with us in the academy, and we have students from Mexico, from
right.
Peru, from Argentina, from Colombia. We have students that are Colombians, but they live in the States. So how do you adapt all these strategies and all these tools that you have?
Well, I think the key there is their access to the resources. The student can be from India, from China, from Germany, but if they don't have access to the resources, then I can't use the same kind of planning. and the kind of the same scheme for everyone. I'm very fortunate that in the classes that we give, everybody's from Latin America, whether it be Mexico or Panama, Ecuador, Peru. We have students from all Latin America. But I think we're lucky in the sense that us Latin Americans, we share, I say, a general heritage, and so we all have kind of a lot in common, and so that makes it easier. That's something else that's pretty funny too. If you listen to a Mexican that's just learning English, and you listen to a person from Chile that's just learning English, and a person from Panama, and they speak English, they all have the same accent. So you won't really know what country they're from, unless you ask them, which is, I think, something. It's something very interesting about the language, and how, even though somebody from Mexico sounds very different than somebody from Argentina, when they speak English, it's almost the same. You know, so
100%.
our brains are hardwired almost the same way when it comes to teaching the second language.
Yeah,
So
I
yeah.
completely agree. Yeah. And how do you incorporate technology into your teaching? Now let's dive into ChatGPT, for example.
Oh
How
boy.
how to introduce, like you were talking about Netflix or series or whatever, TV shows which are completely different to series, but
Hmm. Right.
we can still like luckily we can still talk about TV shows that are different, and they have more of these cultural background. Like for example, if
Sure.
I want TV shows here in Irish TV, that would be something completely different to what I would have in the States, for example. So how
Oh,
do
for
you
sure.
incorporate all these tools and resources into your teaching?
Well, I do it in every way possible, because as the years progress, there's more and more resources. There's so much competition and tools to learn the language. So I think as teachers, we have to move with the wave. We have to move with the current, or we're going to drown. And I think the younger the students, the more they know about technology. In fact, I mean, there's a lot of facades to this. There's a lot of parts to it. The first part is, I think social media has really changed the way uh, people pay attention in a class. If you give a class now online versus 10 years ago, if you're not fast paced, people get bored. And
Or
that's
10 years
because,
ago we were doing it through Skype.
or 10 years ago, right? Because social media works that way. I mean, TikTok, for example, they're very short videos. So people, they're quickly engaged. Their attention span is very short. And that has kind of gone over now to education as well. It definitely has gone into education, where kids they rather watch a video than just see a teacher explaining something for half an hour. So we have to, or in my case, I try to use as many tools as possible. Of course, not saturating, but just kind of looking for new things, and how else I can change, or what else can I use that maybe is in fashion compared to 2 or 3 years ago. Um, and I think, uh, now that we were talking about this Chat GPT, that's gonna. I don't know if you want to talk about that now, but I think
Yeah,
that's
dive
changed,
into it.
and I think it's gonna be a huge change in education. I think many teachers around the world, and not just English teachers, I'm saying teachers of all subjects, have no idea of the technology that is out there and available for our students. And I think the students are much more aware of the technology than the teachers. The difference is the students don't know how to use it to its potential the way a teacher would. So my daughter taught me about, or she showed me Chat GPT a few weeks ago, and my daughter's 13, and all the students that I've talked to that are very young, they all know what Chat GPT is. And I've asked many teachers, and they have no idea what Chat GPT is. So it goes to show you kind of how unbalanced that is, and how we have to change that. I think teachers have to be more knowledgeable, and have to be constantly investigating, because if you're not on the same page as your students, they're just going to get bored. So I
Especially,
incorporate it.
especially if you're one of those that thinks that Chat GPT is here to replace you. Like that's
Yeah.
bad.
Yo, yeah, for
That
sure.
won't happen. That he could be like a tool for you, like a compliment. It
Well,
saves time. It saves time, for example. But I used it once in a while, and you have to make corrections. Like you can't copy and paste
oh
whatever
yeah.
he.
Well, Hernan, they said the same thing about Google when Google came out. They said, "Oh no, Google's going to replace teachers," and that didn't happen. And I think it's the same way with artificial intelligence. Yes, it can give you answers, and yes, it can give you feedback, but not all students know how to get the feedback, and also not all students know how to use it to its full potential. And you're also right. Not everything that ChatGPT is 100% accurate, and that's something that maybe people are finding out. In fact, I was looking at some text a couple hours ago from a student, and I there's actually an AI plagiarism checker. So now I took that text and I put it into an AI, and it told me this text is most likely written completely by an AI tool.
Oh
So
my.
I mean, look how fast the world is moving. Now there's AI plagiarism checkers, which is crazy, right?
And how can you prove it? Like how would you prove that to a student, for example?
Oh,
If it tells you that it's completely written by an AI tool, how would you prove it to him or to her?
well, I'm not an expert on AI, but what I have read on the AI is that AI just basically it's a predictor of patterns in language and coding and so forth. So it's very good at predicting what the next word would be in a sentence, and it keeps in mind the context of the sentence. So there's tools that do the same thing, so that's how they can kind of catch whether that was produced by an AI or not, which is mind blowing. Because if I would have read the text and I would have never used the AI plagiarism checker, I would have thought it was real text. The reason I put it into the AI detection tool was because I thought it was too perfect for a student that was just learning English. It was
Uh,
basically had like no errors, so I said this can't be, and I was right. Um,
but
but
I can guarantee you, I can assure that if you tell ChatGPT to write a text with errors, considering that I'm an A1 student, he or it not he, it will write an AI A1, sorry, text with some gaps or some slips like.
well, that's a good. We should do that. We should do that. We should try it out. You should send me a text done by an AI, and then I'll put it in the plagiarism checker and see what comes out. That's a good test actually. So we can check
We
that
can
out.
do it. Yeah, we
Sure.
can do it. All right. But everything sounds great. But what about if you share some tips for improving students' vocabulary in English? Like, yeah, I don't know. You can mention, for example, the five best apps that you can
Oh
think
wow.
of,
Oh
or or,
wow.
or websites just for vocabulary. For example, I would say Duolingo. Like students, they keep on asking about Duolingo, and I would say Duolingo could be one of them for vocabulary.
Yeah.
It's really good for vocabulary. That's I would say
Sure.
that's the only thing what is good for. Myself, for example, I'm doing the Italian course on Duolingo, and it
Oh
has
yeah.
given
How's it going?
it's good. Yeah, it's good. It's good. I'm getting there, but it has given me lots of vocabulary. But I need more. Like I need more tools, and eventually I would need someone to practice with. Otherwise, it'd be useless. Like
Well, I think there's a lot of great sites and a lot of great apps. I think for pronunciation, a great website is called Speech Ace. And Speech Ace is one of the few, I mean, it's really the only one that I've seen where they give you words and phrases, and then you pronounce them, and it kind of records your voice, and then it gives you feedback on how well you pronounce the word. And if you pronounce a certain word in the sentence incorrectly, it tells you which word, and it gives you a score of how well you pronounced the word or the sentence. So, and like I said before, without feedback, there's nothing, right? How many of your friends that only speak Spanish, you hear them singing the words of a song in English, and it's just like, what are you saying, man? Because there's no feedback. Nobody, they're making fools out of themselves, but they're trying. But if there's no feedback, they would never know what sounds to correct. So I think this website of Speech Ace is really for pronunciation. It is the best. Another one that's very good, that but this one focuses on reading, and I want to emphasize how important reading is. And I think reading is, of all of the tools, or I would say the skills to focus on to improve your overall English, reading is key, because when we read, it is it's now been researched that it's the best way to improve your vocabulary, the best way to improve your grammar in an implicit way. You're learning grammar, but without knowing that you're learning grammar, because you're seeing tenses and word order and the syntax all in the text when you're reading. So it improves your grammar. It improves your ability to write better and even speak better. So definitely reading. And I think the best website for reading is called readtheory.org. I think that's the best website out there. I like that one because you take a diagnostic test, and then it gives you texts that are to your level, and then it gives you a quiz. And if you do very well, then they give you texts that are a little bit more difficult. And if you do bet poorly on a quiz, they give you a text that it's easier. So it's always pushing you and giving you something that's, challenging but not overwhelming. So you'll do terribly, but not something too easy where you're not learning anything. So I think it's fantastic in that sense. So readtheory.org, definitely for reading. Um, More than a website, I think it is a fantastic idea to choose a series, whatever it may be, but choose one series and then watch it and with subtitles in English. And I'll tell you why. Our brains are very adept at adapting to the way a person speaks. So, you as a teacher might know this. So, you have students, right? They're in class with you, and you start talking to them in English. And after 2 weeks, they might not understand the meaning of each word that you say, but they understand the words that you're saying, because our brain adapts to the pronunciation and the intonation of the person we are listening to. So the reason I say to choose a series is because in a series you usually have the same cast, the same actors, and so your brain starts getting accustomed to the way this actor speaks and this character speaks, and it's easier for you to then understand the characters in the series. Whereas if you choose a movie, to see every single time and it's a different movie, your brain wouldn't get so accustomed to the way that the actors are speaking, because the intonation changes and the accents change and all that. So that's why I really advise that somebody chooses a series and watch, as many seasons as you can with the subtitles in English.
All right, great tips, Teacher Luis. Thanks very much for that. How do you approach teaching pronunciation to your students? Now, you had given us some apps and some resources, but
Mhm.
now how do you approach it? Like this is the most difficult part of teaching. For example, myself, I don't focus on correction, as long as they're communicating their message,
Well,
regardless
I
of their
agree with you.
pronunciation. Now, if they're saying, I don't know, pitch instead of peach, then that would be something to call in, But other than that, if they're communicating and if they're getting a response, if I understood what they said, I don't focus on the error, because correction does not make a master,
I
whereas
agree.
practice is
I
master.
agree.
But how do you approach pronunciation to your students?
Okay, well, I think there's two answers to that. The first one is, I agree with you that overcorrection will kind of leave the student not motivated to continue learning, because they'll say, I'm just doing horrible. I'm getting correct all the time. I'm not doing well. So I think overcorrecting is not good. What I usually do is when I have conversations with the students or ask them something, and they say something incorrectly. For example, they say this instead of these, which is a common mistake. I said, "Oh, you mean these?" And so I repeat the sentence again in the correct pronunciation. I do that a lot, but I think a very good technique that students can use is really something that, every time as a teacher that I learn a new technique, I say, of course, but we don't know the name for it and all that stuff, because, it wasn't researched yet and all that. But there's something called the imitation technique or the shadowing technique, which is something that started to really be used, I would say, about 5 or 6 years ago. And it's the way babies learn language. Now, babies don't learn grammar. Babies learn language by listening to a word. They listen to a word. Okay, mom, mom, dad, dad, and they repeat what they heard. And so this imitation technique or the shadowing technique, and there are many videos of this on YouTube that you can look, imitation technique or shadowing technique. Basically, what this is the student would listen to a native speaker say a sentence or a paragraph, and they read it at the same time. And then there's a pause, and simply the student will then just repeat what they heard. And that's why it's called the imitation technique, because, at the end of the day, pronunciation is just imitation of sound. Pronunciation, we have to kind of change the student's chip that pronunciation is grammar. It's not grammar. Pronunciation is one thing, and then grammar is another. Pronunciation is just imitation of sound. That's all it is. It's imitation of sound. And I think if students think that way, I'm just imitating the sound instead of I'm learning grammar, they'll do much better in their pronunciation. But that's a fantastic technique, the shadowing technique or the imitation technique. There's hundreds of videos online for that, and it's really useful. It really works. It's that simple. It's just listening, reading, and repeat. Listening, reading, and repeat. I think
Do
that's
you
fantastic.
do you do you suggest like an amount of time every day? Like, I don't know, if you do it for 30 minutes every day, Monday to Sunday, then you might get a result eventually. I don't know, within 6 months or whatever. Do
Oh,
you
I
have a recommendation in order also avoiding burning out? Because that also
sure.
they start with a lot of petrol, and then they get on they would just run out of it on the way.
I agree. I think what it's like anything in life, Hernan. If you want something, you have to have some discipline. And the more disciplined you are, the faster you learn. And that goes with English or chemistry or taekwondo or whatever it is. If you're a disciplined person, you will learn faster. We also have to keep in mind that there are different learning styles because dyslexia is prevalent. I think there are many people in the world that have dyslexia and don't know they have dyslexia. I think last time that I read, about 30% of the world's population has dyslexia, which is really high. That means 3 out of every 10 people has dyslexia, or at least a level of it, because there's low levels and there's high levels. So a person with dyslexia, for example, maybe they won't do as good in reading as another person. But maybe one of their other skills kind of compensates for that, and those people maybe are much better at listening or speaking. So I would say that work not on one skill, but work on many. Maybe maybe try to read in English 2 or 3 times a week a text. Readtheory.org, like I said before, is fantastic. So read as much as you can, listen as much as you can. And again, you don't have to really sit down and study grammar. That's not the idea. The more immersed you can get in the language, the better. When I mean immersed, try to listen to music in English, watch your shows in English. The news that you read, try to read the text in English. The more immersed you get in it, the easier it will be. Some people, unfortunately, due to time restrictions, they say, no, but I don't have time. So they'll just wait for a Saturday or Sunday and try to do all these English exercises, and the brain gets tired. It's not going to absorb the information. It's not going to remember all the information that it needs in order to really have uh, a good progression. So I would say, just when you think you don't have time, you can wash the dishes and listen to a podcast in English. You
100%.
know,
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Yeah,
you
you can drive, you can
you can
commute to work, and
exactly.
and just listen to a podcast or something.
Right,
All right,
right.
I'm going to leave aside for one question the script. So we're going to switch code, some code swapping, because I always like to emphasize with my students that you don't need to be a native speaker in order to communicate in English with someone.
True.
So at this moment, we have spoken English for 29 minutes and 20 seconds with no hassle, with no hassles. But now we can switch to español. Y yo, como profesor también que soy consciente de que en el aula nosotros como profesores de inglés enfrentamos desafíos, ¿verdad? Y quisiera que usted nos cuente, profesor Luis Eduardo, algunos desafíos que usted ha enfrentado en su práctica como docente y cómo los ha superado.
Bueno, Yo creo que esto pasa en todas las materias, donde quizás todos tenemos un familiar que dice, no, yo odio inglés. ¿Y por qué odia el inglés? No, porque el profesor que tuve era muy malo conmigo. Entonces yo creo que muchas de las personas tienen un trauma con el idioma, pero no por el idioma, sino por que cuando estaban en el colegio o en un curso, el docente no tuvo la mejor relación con ellos. Y yo sí soy muy fiel al pensamiento que los sentimientos están muy ligados con el aprendizaje, ¿cierto? Si un estudiante se siente apoyado y siente que puede confiar en que esta persona está haciendo su mejor esfuerzo para que él aprenda y confía que el profesor cree que él tiene la capacidad, entonces hay mejor rendimiento allí. Um, el mayor desafío, wow. Eh, yo sé que suena como algo loco, pero la pobreza. ¿A qué me refiero a eso? Desafortunadamente hay niños que si no comieron bien por falta de recursos, pues no van a aprender nada. Entonces, eh, primordialmente, como dije en una de las preguntas anteriormente, los recursos que tiene el individuo que está aprendiendo son primordial. Recursos tanto de comida, como de espacio, como de acceso a las herramientas que tienen los demás. Todos son factores. Um, yo creo que esas cosas, ¿no? ¿Qué relación tiene el estudiante con el inglés y los recursos que ese mismo tiene a ellos? Sí.
All right, that's perfect. Let's go back to English then. How do you help your students to build their confidence in speaking English?
Um, I think we all have strengths and we all have weaknesses as
Yeah.
human beings and as students and as teachers, right? So as a teacher, like a good coach, we're basically coaches. What we do is we tell the student who maybe is not very good at vocabulary, but maybe they're very good at listening. So I say, hey, your listening is fantastic. You're doing, great. But maybe we got to work a little bit on vocabulary. So it's a lot of positive feedback on the things they do well, while you're focusing on the things that they don't do well, and not really focusing that they're doing that so poorly. Um, I think positive feedback is very important.
Okay. We've lost him. Can you hear me, guys, on YouTube? Can you hear me on Facebook? I think we have lost
I can
teacher.
hear you.
You can hear me.
Can
All
you hear
right,
me?
perfect. Yes,
Yeah,
we were losing you, but now you're back. All right, so you were talking about positive feedback. You're focusing on positive feedback, and at the same time, you're looking at what their
what their weak
weaknesses.
spots are.
Then
Right.
you
Yep.
and then you try to do like put a weakness over the strengths. Did I
Of
get it
course. Yeah,
right?
you focus on the student's weakness while giving positive feedback on their strength. And show them that if they could do something very well in one skill, they can totally do it in the other. It just takes more time. And because some students say, "No, but my English is horrible." Okay, but when people say I'm terrible at English, what does that mean? I'm horrible at English. You can't be horrible at everything. Maybe you're horrible at reading, but you're not horrible at listening. Maybe you're horrible at writing, but you're not horrible at speaking. So we can't say we're horrible in English. It doesn't work like that. I always think that every student does something well better than the other skills, and that's what we have to keep in mind. If they can do it in one, they can do it the other. It's a lot about believing in themselves, and you as a teacher showing them that they can do it and it's possible for sure.
100%. That's great advice, Luis. All right, we're nearly coming to the end of this episode, unfortunately. But how do you encourage students to practice their English outside of class? That's a hard one. And
That's
how
a
do
hard
you
one.
and how do you actually prove it? Like how can you be sure that they're practicing outside of class? Like this is my everyday, as we say in Spanish, el pan de cada día. It's just tough. They think
It's
that
tough.
they want to be bilingual, they want to be fluent. Some of them want to talk like a native, which is nearly impossible. But at the same time, they only practice 2 or 4 hours a week, which is when they have class. How can we
Right.
encourage them to practice out of classroom?
Well, we have to remind them that English is like it's like a gym. When you go to exercise, Whatever you put in, the work you put in, those are the results you're going to get back. So if you're putting in 30% of the effort, you're only going to learn 30% back. So I tell my students, once you're in English class, you're in debt. Están en deuda. Están en deuda. You have to pay 100%. You got to give me 100% if you want to learn 100%. But being more specific to for each student, if you have a smaller class, and there's some people that like music, there's some people that like art. So what you can do is recommend an activity that is based on their likes, and when they come back, you ask them questions based on that activity that you gave them that was based on their likes. Because there are students that like music, and then if you give them an activity that's based on history, they're not going to do it with the same emphasis. But if you can really tailor the class or the activities for them to do outside of the class that are to their likes and tailored to what they like, you'll have a better probability that they'll do it and they'll practice.
Yeah, that sounds like a really effective approach. And in terms of pronunciation, how can you encourage them to practice out of the class? Because that's obviously an approach that you're using to encourage input. But
Yeah,
in terms of output, because at the end of the road, what they want is they want production. They want to be able to write and speak, and they normally don't get it that's the last stage. Like
yeah, yeah,
Stephen Krashen says, for example, that in order for you to be fluent in English, you have to receive at least 2,000 hours of input. Imagine that. I mean, like you
yeah.
need
That's
you need 2,000 hours of input in order to be fluent. So what
yeah.
could be a good approach? What can you suggest that all our listeners, sorry, in order to improve their speaking or to practice their speaking out of the classroom?
Well, as I mentioned before, if you don't have the vocabulary and the knowledge to produce, to speak and write, there's no way you're going to be able to do it. So I would say it's a combination: read and listen as much as you can, and also maybe with this tool that I recommended, which is Speech Ace, try to work on specific phonetic sounds. When I like that web page because it gives you feedback on how well you are pronouncing certain words. But it's got to be something that's done simultaneously while they're reading and they're listening. It's not just focusing on pronunciation, because if they don't have the vocabulary, they'll never be able to produce. So you have to read, you have to listen. You can work on your pronunciation while you're doing that, but you have to read and listen while you're working on pronunciation. Speech Ace, I mean, for pronunciation. And when it comes to writing, I think these new AI tools are key. Because before, as students, when students used to do writing activities and texts, they would have to wait for a teacher to sit down and correct them. And nowadays, it's very few teachers really sit down and look at and read all the paragraphs and mark all the grammar. And you, as a teacher, I mean, I used to do it too. There's students where you mark every little mistake they had, and you put the correction. You say, "Look, these are your mistakes." And some students, they'll look at it for 5 seconds and say, "Okay," they don't care. So I think a good way to do it now is with ChatGPT. You can put a text in, and you can ask ChatGPT, please show me my mistakes and explain my errors to me. Explain my mistakes. And the artificial intelligence can now show you, okay, these were your mistakes, and this is why you made the mistake, and this is the correct text. And I think that feedback, when it comes to speaking and writing, is key. Without feedback and speaking and writing, you're not going to get better, especially when you're just beginning. So I think when it comes to writing, ChatGPT is fantastic for giving feedback. Fantastic.
All right, very good. So let's write it down. Chat GPT in order to practice your English, to improve your communication skills, your input, your output. Luis, how about this is the $1 million question. How can you think in English and not in Spanish or not in your native language? That's the,
Ooh,
I
that's a
said
good.
is the 1 million question.
I think I think I said it once before, and the key is immersion. I have had students where I try to speak English as much as possible in class, and I try to get all the activities are in English, whether it be video activities or everything is in English. And I encourage students to, when they leave class, watch all their series in English, try to read in English. And I have had students say, you know what, teacher, I had a dream in English for the first time in my life. And that happens only when you are thinking in English. Um, I think the students have to understand English is a different language. It's not Spanish. So the idea that I have to translate every single word is only going to slow down your learning process because you're too busy trying to be a translator instead of trying to learn. So forget about translating every word. Read as much as you can and try to listen to as much as you can, but don't watch the shows with a dictionary in your hand. Just watch it. Your brain will eventually get the context because you listen to it so many times. Just give it time. So the key is immersion and patience and discipline.
That's a great approach and that's a great advice. But finally, what other suggestions, what other advice do you have for individuals who are learning English as a second language? That is basically our dear community, especially the most of our students, most of our subscribers, followers, listeners, they're Spanish speakers. All right, because we are aiming to be the biggest Spanish speaking community that has a goal in common, which is communicating English. So, what could be some piece of advice for them?
So my advice for everybody that wants to learn English, no se rindan. No se rindan. Si no se rinden, tarde o temprano van a llegar a la meta. Pero si se rinden, ¿estás seguro que nunca llegarán a ella? No se rindan, traten de siempre estar inmersos en el lenguaje, practicar, y no se trata de uno pegarse a un libro de gramática, sino más bien lean y escuchen lo más que puedan y con el tiempo lo van a aprender, estoy seguro, pero la meta es la disciplina.
Do you have a suggestion or a time in mind? I don't know, 2 hours every day,
Uh, I
half an
think I
hour.
think I think 2 hours is too much, but I'm gonna be realistic at that. I'm gonna be realistic, all right? Because I can say, I mean, the best thing would be an hour a day, but nobody's gonna do that an hour a day. But I want the students and the people who are listening to think, how much time do you spend on TikTok? How much time do you spend on Instagram? Right? It's research that a normal person between 18 and 24, they're spending 2 hours a day on social media. Take 2 hours of those 2 hours. If you just dedicate 30 minutes of that to learning English, and you can do it on TikTok and you can do it on Instagram, you can do it on YouTube. 30 minutes a day, I guarantee within 6 months, you are going to be able to express yourself, maybe not in all the verb tenses, but you will be able to express yourself and understand a basic level within 6 months for sure. And this is without having a teacher. So imagine if you had a teacher plus you practice outside of the classroom, you can really do something special in 6 months.
All right, 30 minutes a day. Sorry, that would be about 900 minutes a month if you did it. If you did it every day.
It's about 3.5 hours a week, and 3.5 hours a week it's a good amount of time. It really is. And 30 minutes is enough where you're not saturating the brain, but it's not too little. You're not learning anything. What I do recommend, if you're going to study, and this goes not only for English, but for any subject, it is proven that the best time to study is right when you wake up and right before you go to sleep, because that's when the brain most takes in the information. So, right when you wake up and right before you go to sleep is the most recommended.
That's excellent advice, Luis. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thanks everybody for tuning in and sharing your insights on teaching English as a second language.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
No, no, the pleasure is ours. All right. Thanks everybody for tuning in, And Lucho, stay with us. Stay with me. I'm gonna end up the podcast, the episode for today. But stay with me, please.
Sure, sure.